Well, good evening, everyone, and thank you for joining me for another watch party. Today, we're going to watch a documentary about one of the most infamous people in Iranian history and Iranian politics. It's also probably one of the most misunderstood and misquoted eras of Iranian politics. And of course, I'm referring to Mossadegh and the so-called 1953 coup, which never happened. But of course, anyone who's not Iranian, who seems to think they are an expert on Iran, the first thing that they will talk about is, this so-called the democratically elected prime minister, and then the Shah came and the CIA coup, right? Like all that nonsense. And of course, I'm referring to none other than Mossadegh, which is pictured. Oh, wait, sorry, that's not Mossadegh. That's actually Nosferatu. Sorry, guys. Let me get the correct picture of Mossadegh up here so that you guys know who I am referring to. So this is Mossadegh, the infamous quote-unquote prime minister of Iran, that non-Iranians love to quote. They love to tell us Iranians about Mossadegh, right? As if like we somehow don't know our own history, as if we somehow don't know anything about Mossadegh. And they also like to pretend that Mossadegh is the one and only prime minister that Iran ever had, which is the farthest thing from the truth. These people who talk about Mossadegh being democratically elected have no knowledge of any of the prime ministers who came before him or after. They have no knowledge or understanding of the fact that Mossadegh has actually ties to the Soviets at the time, and he was funded by the Soviets in order to destabilize Iran and basically turned Iran into a Soviet proxy. They have no idea about the fact that Mossadegh actually tried to suspend the constitution of Iran and to basically turn himself into a dictator. So it wasn't, in fact, the Shah that was authoritarian. It was Mossadegh that was the authoritarian dictator. And the people who also like to talk about Mossadegh also have no idea that Iran was a constitutional monarchy. They have no knowledge or understanding of the Persian constitutional revolution, which happened in 1905. And I actually have explained that in one of my previous watch parties. So without further ado, we are going to get started on this documentary. And of course دوستایی که دارن روی اکس نگاه میکنند، اگر که میخواین کامنت به زبان انگلیسی بذارین لطفاً به ما توی کانال یوتیوب هم بپیوندین، اونجا میتونیم به زبان انگلیسی صحبت بکنیم. Big shout out to, of course, the mods and the members here. Thank you for being part of this. I look forward to your comments and your feedback. So guys, get settled in. We're going to watch this documentary. The one thing I want to point out is that this documentary is not glamorous, so do not expect high quality graphics or anything like that. I actually don't even know who produced or created this documentary. So if anyone knows, please let me know. But it is probably one of the most accurate documentaries that I have ever seen about Mossadegh and the 1953 so-called coup, right? So we're going to get into this now, and let us begin.
Happened in 1953 in Iran is often referred to by the Western media as a military coup to topple the democratically elected Prime Minister Mohammad Mossadegh and reinstate the Shah of Iran. Hello, this is Persian History, and today we are going to talk about the so-called 1953 coup d'etat in Iran. As I already mentioned, it has become conventional wisdom that in 1953 the United States CIA led a coup to overthrow the then Prime Minister of Iran, Mossadegh, for nationalizing the British-owned oil industry in Iran, and that many of the US problem with the current Iranian government stem from this coup. Even former President Barack Obama spreads this.
So that's true, right? Like that's the constant narrative that we Iranians get from non-Iranians. They like to Iran-splain our country to us, and all of them, like basically all these people who know nothing about Iran or Iranian history, this is it's the same narrative that all of them keep on push, right? It's just they know nothing about Iran, but they will blame everything that's happening now on 1953 as if somehow Mossadegh brought democracy to Iran, which is the farthest thing from the truth. Mossadegh was actually trying to suspend the Iranian constitution, and he wanted to unilaterally declare power, and he actually wanted to turn Iran from a constitutional monarchy into a dictatorship, and the Shah prevented him from doing that.
Lie. Hollywood has also repeated it many times, as demonstrated by the popular movie Argo. First, technically, there was no coup. By definition, a coup d'etat is a sudden, violent, and illegal seizure of power from a government. Was this the case in Iran? Absolutely not. Mossadegh was the Prime Minister of Iran, and as such, under the constitution then in place, he could legally be removed by the Shah. And the Shah did indeed dismiss Mossadegh.
So did you guys catch that? So he could legally be removed by the Shah, right? And the Shah did that. So there was no coup. The Shah was exercising his powers under the constitution of Iran at the time to remove Mossadegh and replace him with a different person to become prime minister. Guys, these are the small, the small but very important points that people who know nothing about Iran fail to mention. So already, like for me, this documentary, I'm at a 10 out of 10 on this one already. Like everything they've said so far, 100% factual. And I appreciate the fact that they also have the documents to back up exactly what it is that they're saying.
In fact, it was Mossadegh who staged a coup to seize power. The only unconstitutional behavior came from Mossadegh himself, who refused to step down and ordered the arrest of the officers who delivered the Shah's notice of his dismissal, leading to the creation of a military dictatorship under Mossadegh. Second,
did you catch that? So it was Mossadegh who was trying to create a military dictatorship, right? And the Shah actually saved Iran from turning into a military dictatorship under Mossadegh.
the CIA was not the driving force behind Mossadegh's removal on August 19. There is a rumor that one CIA agent in his biography allegedly took credit for the protests that eventually led to Mossadegh's removal. But declassified documents from the CIA demonstrate just the opposite. During the crisis, the CIA station in Tehran reported the anti-Mossadegh protest contained a large element of spontaneity, and there seemed to have been a genuine reaction of shock and dismay on part of the Tehran populace when the Shah left Iran for Iraq. The CIA station also admitted 2 days before Mossadegh's removal that the CIA cut out of military preparations by General Batman Gelich and Zahedi. In fact, the CIA was unaware that Mossadegh was being removed at all, and they were very surprised that anti-Mossadegh forces were taking control over Tehran. The CIA acting director Charles Cabell briefed President Eisenhower that an unexpected strong upsurge of popular and military reaction to Prime Minister Mossadegh's government has resulted, according to late dispatches from Tehran, in the virtual occupation of that city by forces proclaiming their loyalty to the Shah and to his appointed Prime Minister Zahedi. Third,
okay, so did you catch that? First of all, like the people who talk about Mossadegh never talk about Zahedi, okay? A different prime minister that was elected. But most importantly, like this guy, so okay, I was at a 10. I'm at a 9 only because he's going a little bit too quickly, right? So for people who are not familiar with what happened, I feel like he's going a little bit too fast. So it's hard to sort of keep up and keep track of everything. But what he basically said is that this whole narrative of how the CIA was, supposedly behind the 1953 coup, that came from like this random person who wrote, his own autobiography. And then within his autobiography, he claimed that the CIA was involved, but he didn't have any sort of documentation or facts to back it up. Meanwhile, actual CIA documentation that he is showing here demonstrate that the CIA actually had no idea what was going on in Iran at the time or what the Shah was doing, and the CIA was actually caught off guard, right? So keep that in mind here. Keep that in mind.
but not only was the CIA unaware that Mossadegh was being removed on August 19th, but they expected Mossadegh to remain in power for the next 2 months. They ceased all activities against him and even considered working with him. Mossadegh's illegal government was in fact overthrown 3 days after the CIA's failed attempt on August 16. Wow, so if one can speak of a coup at all, then Mossadegh's removal was a direct response to an anti-constitutional coup.
That's 100%. So this is what I've been constantly saying. The only coup d'etat that happened in the 1950s was Mossadegh himself, who was trying to unilaterally seize control of the Iranian military and the Iranian government, and he tried to suspend the constitution and the parliament. And so the Shah actually prevented Mossadegh's coup from being successful. But people have spun this around and they make it seem as if the Shah preventing Mossadegh from turning Iran into a dictatorship was the coup. No, it was Mossadegh himself who was responsible for the attempted coup d'etat. So that's what this documentary is essentially saying. So I'll go back a little bit because they are going very quickly. But this is like very, very important information. And I also appreciate the fact that this documentary literally has receipts for everything that they're talking about here. So this is really good.
Thrown 3 days after the CIA's failed attempt on August 16. Wow, so if one can speak of a coup at all, then Mossadegh's removal was a direct response to an anti-constitutional coup staged by Mossadegh. 69 years ago, on August 19, 1953, the resurrection of the Iranian nation took place. While on one hand, Mossadegh supporters called that day the American destruction of Iran's last chance to become prosperous, Mossadegh opponents, however, celebrate this day and call it the liberation of Iran from the tyranny of one of Iran's wealthiest feudal landlords and reactionaries. Wait, feudal landlord? Reactionary? No way. Wasn't Mossadegh a progressive, self-made man who fought for freedom? I'm sorry to disappoint you, but that is not true.
So guys, the feudal landlord part is really important because, again, one of the things that the Shah was doing at the time is he was getting rid of that feudal tribalism system. He was getting rid of the serfs, because serfs back then still existed under the Qajar dynasty. So all of these feudal landlords did not like the fact that the Shah was modernizing Iran, and he was getting rid of all of the slave labor that these feudal landlords had access to. And I don't know if this documentary is going to mention it because I'm doing a blind watch here, but Mossadegh was actually connected to the Qajar dynasty, the previous dynasty. So there was also there was an element of personal anger in there as well, because Mossadegh didn't like the fact that there was a new dynasty. He always felt like he should have been part of the ruling class. And so all the people who claim that he was like one of the people actually have no idea about his background. So yeah, 100%. Like this is critical in background information here that these people don't really talk about. So I'll go back a little bit. I'll watch this part, and I'm not going to interrupt unless there's something that I think is completely like wrong or whatever the case might be. But so far, like this documentary for me, 9 out of 10. The only reason it's not a 10 out of 10 is because he's speaking a little bit too quickly. And so for people who might not necessarily be familiar with Iran or with some of these names or terms, they might be a little bit lost. But like this is a very good documentary so far.
Constitutional coup staged by Mossadegh. 69 years ago, on August 19, 1953, the resurrection of the Iranian nation took place. While on one hand, Mossadegh supporters called that day the American destruction of Iran's last chance to become prosperous, Mossadegh opponents, however, celebrate this day and call it the liberation of Iran from the tyranny of one of Iran's wealthiest feudal landlords and reactionaries. Wait, feudal landlord? Reactionary? No way. Wasn't Mossadegh a progressive, self-made man who fought for freedom? I'm sorry to disappoint you, but that is not true. Mossadegh was a descendant of the Turkic Qajars who had occupied.
He mentions it. Okay. Oh my gosh. So they actually mentioned that he was related to the Qajar dynasty, which was the previous dynasty prior to the Pahlavi dynasty. In the previous dynasty, they were very corrupt. And they basically had turned Iran into a third world country backwater place, right? So, wow, like this documentary so far, 100% on point.
Iran and impose their brutal dictatorship on the Iranian people for almost 200 years.
Yeah.
Owning huge estates through forged papers, Mossadegh was a wealthy landlord and eventually married a Qajar princess and was given the office of a provincial finance minister.
Oh, Lex, I love watching your videos. I never heard of half the things you post. Thank you. Thank you, Lex, for joining. I appreciate that. And thank you for your support. Yeah, on this channel, I'm here to share the truth with you. These are the facts that you don't hear in the mainstream media. These are the facts that you don't hear about in the propaganda channels. And of course, these are the facts that the Islamists and the communists don't want you to know about. But of course, everything I bring, I come with receipts. And I'm glad that you're enjoying this. I'm glad that you guys are interested in learning about Iranian history, because a lot of what you think you know about Iran is actually not true. And that's because a lot of it has been pushed by the Islamists and the communists who engage in a lot of revisionist history. And I hope that one of my goals is that you guys not only learn about Iran, but also learn to identify this sort of behavior in your own countries, because what they did to Iran, they're now currently trying to do in your countries. And this revisionist history is a big part of that. So welcome, Lex. I'm glad you're here. I'm glad you're enjoying this. And Scott, thank you so much for gifting the memberships. Always appreciate your support. All right, guys, we're going to continue on with the real truth about who Mossadegh was, and we're going to debunk the myth of this 1953 coup. Let's continue.
In just 10 years, he became one of Iran's richest landowners, totally via his merit and not at all because of his relations and positions of power. Mossadegh was anti-democratic and always sided with the tyrannical Qajar aristocracy.
Yep.
He was an opponent of the democratic movement in Iran, and back then you could already see his unpatriotic behavior when he sided with Muhammad Ali Shah Qajar to torpedo Iran back from a parliamentary monarchy to an absolute monarchy. Even after the restoration of the constitution in 1909, Mossadegh still defended the unpopular Qajar dynasty, and during Reza Khan's seizure of power, he was rightly put in prison for treason. Ironically, Mossadegh was freed from jail by the young Shah of Iran, Mohammad Reza Pahlavi, whom he later betrayed as well as.
So, okay, guys, it's important. So Mossadegh was a traitor. He tried to, so even like well before 1953, guys, this documentary just showed. So well before 1953, like in the 1920s, 1910s and 1920s, Mossadegh tried to overthrow the constitution at the time. Okay, so already he was against a democratically elected parliament, right? This is what people don't know about who Mossadegh really was. Mossadegh was not a pro-democracy person. Mossadegh was someone who always favored dictatorship. Okay, so already he did not like this. He did not like the fact that Iran was turning towards a democracy. And then when he was put in jail, right, the Shah of Iran in 1941, when he assumed the throne, okay, released him from jail, right, pardoned him, and said, you know what? I'm going to give you a chance. I'm going to pardon you, right? This is the same Shah, by the way, that these people claim was, installed in 1953. If the Shah of Iran, and here's the question that I always ask them, and they can never answer this. If the Shah of Iran was installed in 1953, like you claim, what happened in 1941? And then as soon as I say what happened in 1941, they never have a response to that because they have never actually looked far enough back to see what actually happened during the history of during Iran's history. So this is a frustration that we have as Iranians when all these non-Iranian people always try to explain our country's history to us without actually knowing anything about our country's history. They just, throw out these two lines about Mossadegh being democratically elected, even though Mossadegh actually hated democracy. Mossadegh was anti-democracy, and Mossadegh was a traitor. And, if the Shah was such a bad person, why the heck would the Shah pardon him for treason back in 1941, right? Like, no one ever thinks about this stuff. Thank you, Nationalist Libertarian, for your support. I appreciate that. I hope you're enjoying this live stream. And Major, thank you for supporting the channel and for gifting memberships. Appreciate that so much as well. All right, guys, let's continue. Now that we are getting an excellent introduction into what really happened and who Mossadegh actually was. Again, this is probably this whole Mossadegh thing is one of the most misunderstood things about Iranian history. And I can tell you every single time I post something about Iran or the 1979 Islamic Revolution, without a doubt, some random non-Iranian person will say, well, if Mossadegh had been around, this wouldn't have happened. Not understanding that Mossadegh was actually a traitor to Iran, and the Shah was actually preserving Iran's constitutional monarchy and democratic institutions by getting rid of Mossadegh, which, by the way, the Shah had the constitutional authority to do under the Constitution of Iran.
We are going to see in this video. Mossadegh was not a man of progress. He had never realized how important it was to industrialize Iran and longed back to the good old days when Western technology had not yet begun to change the world. He was strongly opposed to the construction of railways and argued that Iranians did not need railways, roads, or
the guy was literally upset that Iran was industrializing and building railways, right? And yet for some reason, non-Iranians try to like idolize him as this democratic person. Like he was literally a feudal landlord who was against modernizing Iran. Like what kind of sane, rational person argues against building railroads, right? If Iran, if you know, God forbid, if Iran had remained in his hands, we would have been even worse off than today.
ports, there was no need to travel. It would be much more comfortable to stay at home. What do we expect from a man who receives state guests in pyjamas in his bedroom? During his term as Prime Minister, Mossadegh exploited the oil dispute with Britain to slowly establish a dictatorship in Iran. Mossadegh violated the constitution and dissolved the Senate, the Kurds, and the parliament after it expressed the will to impeach him. Eventually, he received his letter of dismissal by the Shah, but refused to resign and launched a full-on military coup d'etat. Yeah, what a democrat. The Shah seeing this left the country to give the Iranians the freedom to choose between Mossadegh and him. The Iranians chose him, as we are going to see in this video. Mossadegh's increasing anti-constitutional authoritarianism was initially tolerated by the Iranians, who saw it as a necessary evil to nationalize the oil industry.
Communists, so Major says communists, leftists, and jihadis all don't care about things like constitutions or laws. Never. What you're 100% correct. You know, one of the things that Islamists and jihadis have in common is that they want to destabilize Western societies, and they're all about authoritarian rule. And so Mossadegh is literally no different than the Islamic Republic, right? Like two sides of the same coin here. And in fact, as we have seen in previous documentaries that I've live streamed about the Islamic Republic, one of the reasons that the 1979 Islamic Revolution was successful is because the Islamic regime and the Islamists were actually supported by communists like, you know, people who supported Mossadegh. So 100% right. Communists, leftists, and jihadis don't care about things like constitutions or laws. And that's why Mossadegh tried to suspend and dissolve the parliament, right? Like which prime minister in their right mind would just say, you know what, now that I'm in power, I'm going to dissolve parliament and I'm going to take control for myself. That's what this evil man did. And yet for some reason, the communist and leftist narrative has prevailed in Western media. And that narrative is Mossadegh was democratically elected and the Shah was the dictator. No, this guy, Mossadegh, was the actual authoritarian dictator, as you can see from the proof and the documents provided in this documentary.
But when it became clear that Mossadegh wanted to overthrow the parliamentary monarchy, the masses mobilized and occupied Tehran.
Wait, did you guys catch that? So he said when it became clear that Mossadegh wanted to overthrow the parliamentary monarchy, right? So again, parliament and monarchy. This is what these people don't want you to know about. They don't want you to know the truth. Listen to this again, right?
Saw it as a necessary evil to nationalize the oil industry. But when it became clear that Mossadegh wanted to overthrow the parliamentary monarchy, the masses mobilized and occupied Tehran, declaring their loyalty to the Shah and his appointed Prime Minister Zahedi. And
okay, so again, this is important, guys. This is part of the narrative that the jihadis and the Islamists and the communists don't want you to know. So when Mossadegh tried to consolidate power, the Iranian people actually took to the streets and said, no, we don't want you. We want the Shah, and we want the Shah's new appointed prime minister, who was Zahedi, right? Because these people who know nothing about Iran or they know something about Iran, but they want to fool non-Iranians, they will claim that, the Shah overthrew Mossadegh and then Iran became like an authoritarian dictatorship, which is 100% false. The Shah did not overthrow Mossadegh. He replaced Mossadegh with a different prime minister, Zahedi, someone who was actually loyal to the constitution of Iran. Again, that was the Shah's job, right? Like that's the Shah's role within the constitution. So the Shah was not acting outside of the scope of his power. He was using the powers given to him by the constitution to protect Iran from turning into an authoritarian dictatorship under Mossadegh, right? But again, you never hear this side of the story. You never hear this side of the narrative. You just hear the narrative that's pushed by the Islamists and the communists, because all they want to do is demonize the Shah, because that demonizing is what allows them to legitimize overthrowing the Shah in 1979 and turning Iran into a 7th century Islamic hellhole governed by Sharia law. Because if you actually look at what led to the 1979 Islamic Revolution, it's all based on fake news, false information, and taqiyya. And as you can see, that's exactly what's happening here in 1953.
When Mossadegh sent the army to restore order, the army sided with the people and the constitution.
Here we go.
Despite all the documents mentioned, there is not the slightest hint of a massive CIA involvement in the overthrow of Mossadegh on August 19. Yet, professional historical revisionists, well organized in universities and the media, constantly stress the opposite. The most prominent of these historical revisionists being Ervand Abrahamian and Malcolm Byrne. First, let's look at Mr. Abrahamian. In his book, Coup d'etat.
Guys, didn't we see this guy in like some documentary? I'm pretty sure that we saw him. Maybe it was the Al Jazeera documentary, but I feel like we've seen this communist guy in one of the previous documentaries we watched about the 1979 Islamic Revolution. I mean, we must have rated it either as like a 0 or like a 3 or something, but I feel like we've seen this guy. And yeah, he's one of the ones that just pushes the fake news propaganda about Mossadegh and all that communist nonsense.
Abrahamian claims that the plans for the events of the 19th of August were implemented after the meeting between US Ambassador Lloyd Henderson and Mossadegh on August 18, one day before the overthrow. But if we check the CIA reports on that specific day, we not only see that the CIA had no plans or predictions for that day, but that the United States was even preparing for a compromise with Mossadegh. Let's look at this character for a moment. Abrahamian is not only a sympathizer of the Islamic Republic, justifying their rule as an inevitable response to American imperialism.
And there you have it, guys. So the people who are pushing this false narrative about Mossadegh versus the Shah of Iran are people who literally support the Islamic Republic. So do you now understand how this propaganda and fake news has circulated? Because these Islamists and these jihadis infiltrate Western societies, right? They infiltrate academia, and then they write these books, and then those books are picked up by non-Iranians, right? And so that's how this narrative comes into play, even though this guy is showing you that what he is saying does not actually align with the CIA documents at the time.
But he is also a sympathizer of the past terrorist Tudeh party in Iran. And
Tudeh party, by the way, was fully funded by the Soviets at the time. So the Tudeh party was basically a communist Marxist group funded by Moscow in order to destabilize Iran and to try and turn Iran into a Russian proxy, because at that time, Iran and the Soviet bloc shared a border.
In his interview with Fariba Amini on August 18, 2020, he described the Tudeh party as follows. The Tudeh party was actually a nationalist party with leftist tendencies. A nationalist party. Let this description melt in your mouth. For everyone who does not know, the Tudeh party was a communist party founded by the USSR during the Soviet occupation of Iran in 1941. They were one of the most active parties who continuously worked towards the overthrow of the Pahlavi dynasty and with it the destruction of the Iranian state. In 1944, the Tudeh party entered Iranian parliament where they supported the Soviet policies in Iran without protest. The Tudeh party not only supported Moscow's plans to balkanize northern Iran, but also held its fourth plenum in Moscow under the direct supervision of the Soviet Union. Now, imagine someone who describes the treacherous Marxist-Leninist Tudeh party as a nationalist party being an Iran expert, let alone being a credible historian. Having ticked off Mr. Abrahamian, let's proceed to the other history forger, Malcolm Byrne. Since 2013, various individuals and media outlets have repeatedly referenced a website and fake headline that has nothing to do with the CIA to prove that the CIA acknowledged its role on August 19th. This website is linked to the Washington State University and has absolutely no ties to the CIA. The fact that the CIA's official website has never admitted to playing a role in Mossadegh's overthrow just proves that this headline is made up and backed by no evidence.
Did you guys catch that? So there's nothing in CIA documentation that actually shows the CIA had anything to do with 1953, and everything that these people are relying upon is based on things that they've made up themselves, right? Like there's no actual CIA documentation or evidence to back this up.
So-called the National Security Archive website is run by journalists and masquerades as a government site. The map you can see here was designed by Ali Rahnama, one of Mossadegh's admirers 60 years after Mossadegh's removal. It has been inserted into the release document so that the viewer believes that this was part of a pre-arranged CIA plan to attack Mossadegh's house. The funniest thing about this article with the fake headline CIA Confession is the use of pictures with the watermark of the Institute for the Study of Contemporary History of the Islamic Republic of Iran.
Do you see that? So they're literally using images that have watermarks from places affiliated with the Islamic Republic. So do you see how this whole fake narrative about Mossadegh and the Shah is something that's even being promoted by the Islamic Republic itself? Do you know why? Because Islamists and communists are two sides of the same coin, and they're both trying to delegitimize the authority and legitimacy of the Shah of Iran, because only by delegitimizing the authority and legitimacy of the Shah of Iran can they then claim that they were correct to do what they did in 1979. So everything that they've done is based on fake information, disinformation, taqiyya, and of course, they're now trying to justify turning Iran into a 1979 Islamic hellhole governed by Sharia law.
I wonder how secret the CIA documents must be if even the Islamic Republic of Iran has access to them. It is also interesting to note that in this article, in which Malcolm Byrne claims to have published documents on the role of the CIA on August 19, his second document proves the opposite. It states that the CIA admitted the nationalists and communists during this period inadvertently assisted our cause through their premature attempts to promote a republican government. This theme was contrary to the public's opinion, whose sympathies were with the Shah. The Shah's dramatic flight out of the country served to further intensify his people's sense of loyalty to him. This action resulted in literal revolt of the population. To sum it up, Malcolm Byrne, who wrote this fake article, is not representative of the CIA and was never authorized to comment on their behalf. The goal of the National Front since its foundation by Mossadegh was the overthrow of Iran's parliamentary monarchy and the abolition of its constitution to establish a republic, although not everyone within the National Front was subscribed to this. One could say that Mossadegh's National Front was in fact the legal continuation of the Communist Tudeh party, which had been declared illegal after a failed assassination attempt on the Shah of Iran, while the National
Yeah, no one ever talks about how the communists tried to assassinate the Shah of Iran in like I think it was like the late 1940s, early 1950s, right? No one ever talks about that. No one ever talks about how Mossadegh was literally connected to people who tried to assassinate the Shah of Iran, right? And Major, yeah, 100%. Like, he looks like a goblin. We like to, refer to him as the Iranian Nosferatu, because he literally looks like Nosferatu.
Front championed Mossadegh's authoritarianism in parliament. The Tudeh party organized violent demonstrations in the streets. Both parties were working hand in hand to abolish Iran's constitutional monarchy.
Does that sound familiar, guys? Like all these like communist parties funded by the Soviets in Iran were encouraging people to go into the streets and try to destabilize the country and overthrow the constitution. Does that sound familiar? Does that sound like, I don't know, Antifa in your countries? Does that sound like all the, Marxist, socialist, people's movement, whatever, garbage movements in Western countries? All of these far left socialist Marxist countries working to destabilize your societies. Does that sound familiar? It happened in Iran. It was happening in Iran for a very, very long time, right? All funded by the Soviets.
Mossadegh was, contrary to circulating claims, not a democratically elected prime minister. The Iranian constitution did not provide for free elections of
Okay, so I want to go back and we're going to play this part again because this is critical, guys. This talks about how the constitution actually works, guys. This is important.
In parliament, the Tudeh party.
And this is going to directly counter the false narrative that Mossadegh was democratically elected. Mossadegh was never democratically elected. Pay attention to this part.
Organized violent demonstrations in the streets. Both parties were working hand in hand to abolish Iran's constitutional monarchy. Mossadegh was, contrary to circulating claims, not a democratically elected prime minister. The Iranian constitution did not provide for free elections of the prime minister, but for the Shah to appoint and remove the prime minister. And when in 1952 the parliament refused to grant Mossadegh additional powers, Mossadegh got enraged and immediately resigned. So you didn't receive emergency powers and decided to throw a tantrum? Very major. Ahmad.
Did you catch that? So it's no one just, becomes the democratically elected prime minister. The prime minister is appointed by the Shah and removed by the Shah and then replaced with someone else. Okay. So again, even the sentence, Mossadegh was democratically, the democratically elected prime minister, literally does not make sense because there's no formal mechanism for anyone to become the democratically elected prime minister. The prime minister was always appointed by the Shah. And in fact, Mossadegh resigned in 1952 because when he wanted to gain more powers, the parliament said no, right, guys? Like it wasn't the Shah who said no, it was the parliament. Listen to this part again, because this part, he goes a little bit quickly, but this is important because it wasn't the Shah who said to Mossadegh, you can't dissolve parliament. It was parliament themselves. And again, parliament, people who are democratically elected. So the democratically elected politicians in Iran said to Mossadegh, no, we're not going to allow you to gain unilateral control of the country.
In parliament, the Tudeh party organized violent demonstrations in the streets. Both parties were working hand in hand to abolish Iran's constitutional monarchy. Mossadegh was, contrary to circulating claims, not a democratically elected prime minister. The Iranian constitution did not provide for free elections of the prime minister, but for the Shah to appoint and remove the prime minister. And when in 1952 the parliament refused to grant Mossadegh additional powers, Mossadegh got enraged and immediately resigned. So you didn't receive emergency powers and decided to throw a tantrum? Very major. Ahmed Qavam became the next prime minister, but was met with massive protests from Mossadegh supporters, especially the Tudeh party, demanding the resignation of Ahmed Qavam.
Ask yourself why people who supported the Tudeh party were upset by this. Again, the Tudeh party, as mentioned in this documentary, was created by Moscow. It was funded by Moscow. And the Tudeh party, the whole purpose of the Tudeh party was to destabilize Iran and hand it over to the Soviets and turn Iran into another Russian proxy of the Soviets at the time. The Tudeh party was protesting.
Shah, to avoid a civil war, reinstated Mossadegh as prime minister, and the parliament was forced to accept Mossadegh's demands for further emergency powers, which empowered him to rule the country by decree. After the overthrow of Mossadegh's government, subsequent interrogations of traitors proved that most of Mossadegh's followers were Tudehi communists who wanted to use Mossadegh to overthrow the Pahlavi dynasty and then to take control over Iran and establish a republic. It is said that they were already planning to proclaim a republic on February 20, 1953, when they heard that the Shah had to go abroad on a medical trip, but failed since the Iranians, fearing Mossadegh would overthrow the monarchy in the Shah's absence, organized demonstrations demanding the Shah to stay. On that day, the Shah made the following remarks. Despite the fact that my illness has been forcing me to travel abroad for a long time, and despite the fact that I wanted to visit the holy sites in Iraq today and then travel to Europe for treatment, I decided to cancel because I see that you demand my presence here. I have no choice but to postpone my trip for the time being. Of course, like everyone else in this country, I have a duty to fulfill and accept the demands of the people. And if the people do not want me to travel and be treated, I will have to cancel this trip. Contrary to what is reported by the leftist media, we don't see here the image of a cruel despot, but the image of a dutiful king loved by his people. The leftist media, who likes to call the Shah of Iran a puppet of the West, should read the following CIA report on the Shah. The Shah has vivacity, imagination, and wit, tempered with a deep sense of personal dignity and almost mystical feeling of his mission and duty to Iran. The Shah identifies himself strongly with the Iranian army, considering himself a qualified strategist and tactician. Devoting a great deal of his private fortune on charities, his popularity is now much greater than at his accession. Were he to make himself absolute dictator on the model of his father, the Iranian...
So even the CIA, guys, even the CIA documents say that his popularity today is much more than it was at the time of his succession. So even the CIA itself is admitting that the Shah of Iran became the Shah of Iran in 1941, not in 1953, okay? So again, this whole fake narrative of the CIA installing the Shah in 1953 makes no sense, because according to the documents themselves, even the CIA admits that the Shah became the Shah in 1941, which is established common knowledge. And yet all these people who try to paint Mossadegh as this democratically elected prime minister know nothing about the real history of Iran. So I hope that this is giving you guys a little bit of input and insight into the kind of Islamic communist propaganda that has unfortunately dominated Western discourse about Iranian politics. Again, these things are a non-issue for us Iranians and Farsi because we know our history, we know what happened, but unfortunately for non-Iranians, because the Islamists and communists have control of the narrative, you guys are getting a totally false narrative. And this documentary is actually exposing that, and this documentary is showing you the truth about what actually happened during that time.
People would acquiesce, but his attachment to democratic principles prevents such a step. These are the CIA's own words. The CIA would have to be very stupid to use such a patriotic man to exploit Iran. What many do not realize, the Shah did not oppose Mossadegh's nationalization of the oil industry. On the contrary, the Shah and Mossadegh were on the same page regarding this issue. The problem, however, was that even though the Shah had given Mossadegh every opportunity to develop a constructive oil policy, Mossadegh was unable to lead a constructive policy.
Did you hear that? So the Shah was not against nationalization. The Shah was pro-nationalization. What he said to Mossadegh is, I agree, let's nationalize the oil. You're the prime minister. Come up with a good policy for how to get that done. Mossadegh, being the, idiot that he was, also being someone who was an authoritarian figure, didn't actually know how to do that because he didn't really care about that. He cared more about consolidating power. So again, right? So all those people in the comments who claim that the Shah was against nationalizing the oil, the Shah was literally pro nationalization of the oil. And when he asked Mossadegh, okay, how do we do it? He couldn't come up with an answer. So let's go back and pay attention to that part again, because that's, again, part of that fake news narrative that people like to throw out there, right?
Stupid to use such a patriotic man to exploit Iran. What many
Oh, Raider, welcome. Thank you for being here. Thank you for the support. Always great to see you, Raider. I hope you are enjoying this live stream where we are debunking the most widely spread disinformation about Iranian history, which is Mossadegh and the 1953 so-called coup d'etat. So thank you and welcome and enjoy.
do not realize the Shah did not oppose Mossadegh's nationalization of the oil industry. On the contrary, the Shah and Mossadegh were on the same page regarding this issue. The problem, however, was that even though the Shah had given Mossadegh every opportunity to develop a constructive oil policy, Mossadegh was unable to lead a constructive policy, sank into destructiveness, depression, and instead blamed the Shah for his failures. What a jerk! Even his own party members had begun to criticize him. Thereupon Mossadegh made the parliament incorrect by forbidding his supporters to participate. Whoever resisted was beaten up by his gangs. Due to the oil shortages and the resulting enormous economic problems caused by his populist economic policies, Mossadegh had several millions dollars worth of money printed without sufficient gold backing.
What does that sound like? Does that not sound like every leftist government out there where they're like, oh, we're running out of money, let's just print more? Like all these lefties, communists, socialists, Marxists, they all think the same, they all operate the same, and they all have like disastrous economic and financial policies for their countries. Like this guy was literally just ordering people to print money because he was running out of it with no actual understanding of how the economy works.
Which caused high inflation. Does this sound familiar to you? Mossadegh had moved closer to the party in his second term. He was working closely with them and
remember, the Tudeh party was a communist Marxist party that was created by the Soviets and was basically funded by them as well. And the purpose of the Tudeh party was to destabilize Iran and to turn Iran into a proxy of the Soviets at the time.
Simultaneously infiltrated the imperial army with Tudeh communists. By mid-1953, however, the Iranians had realized that the goal of Mossadegh's oil policy was to drive the British out of the country so that the Soviets could move in. And
boom, there we go. That's what I have been constantly saying. Mossadegh has had zero intention of actually nationalizing Iran's oil. Mossadegh was a Soviet KGB asset, and everything he was doing was basically to turn Iran into a Soviet proxy. He didn't want to nationalize the oil. He wanted to give control of Iran's oil to the Soviets at the time, because again, Mossadegh was a communist. He was funded by the Soviets. He was funded by the Tudehs, right? The Tudehs being the Russian Soviet party in Iran. And finally, this documentary got to the crux of the matter, which is Mossadegh was an implanted Soviet asset whose purpose was to try and give all of the oil in Iran to the Soviets. This is the real truth about what was going on, and the Shah put a stop to it by getting rid of Mossadegh and appointing a different prime minister. Omid, you're 100% right. Mossadegh was basically like a mini Putin who could speak Farsi at the time. 100%. I agree with this analysis.
And so, the unity between the Shah, Mossadegh, and the parliament that had prevailed at the beginning of the confrontations with the British was now broken. Yes, the American...
Okay, everyone who loves to talk about Operation Ajax, pay attention to this part, okay? Because this part is going to finally explain what Operation Ajax is all about. Because again, all of these non-Iranians love to just throw buzzwords out there, right? They throw buzzwords out there without actually understanding what's going on. So now you'll get the full picture about Operation Ajax.
Wanted to overthrow Mossadegh, and they did try. But the point is that they failed miserably and then tried to mend relations with him, as we will see. Eventually, the Iranians did the job on their own. The name Operation Ajax that has gone down in history was actually TP Ajax. TP for the Communist Tudeh Party and Ajax for the cleaner Ajax. Although Mossadegh was not a communist himself, he often enlisted their support. The communists in Iran were the main source of Mossadegh's power, and the Americans feared a communist takeover if Mossadegh would remain in power. Both the Tudeh Party as well as Mossadegh hated the Pahlavi dynasty. Cooperation with the Tudeh Party suited Mossadegh well, who had a personal vendetta with the Pahlavi dynasty for deposing the previous Qajar dynasty to whom he was related to. Furthermore, for the Tudeh Party, Mossadegh's nationalization of the oil industry was an important step towards a socialist Iran. On June 10, 1953, the Soviet Union and Iran signed a new economic agreement. In further negotiations, the Soviet Union offered to return Iranian gold reserves. It had seized during World War II, border issues were to be settled in Iran's favor, and the Soviet-Iranian Friendship Treaty of 1921 was to be renegotiated. This, of course, worried the Americans, who expected a communist takeover if Mossadegh was not to be stopped. After all, the Tudeh Party was very well organized in Iran and had built a secret network of middlemen in politics, the army, and even the Shah's imperial guard. In fact, the very same scenario took place in Czechoslovakia not too long ago. Anatoly Lavrentiev, the man who was the Soviet ambassador to Iran, had also been the Soviet ambassador to Czechoslovakia in 1948, and he had played an important role in the overthrow of the liberal president Dr. Beneš. Beneš, like Mossadegh, had been the head of a national front government.
So, fun fact, just recently, the Czech Republic, after overthrowing communism, so the Soviets were successful in turning, in taking over the Czech Republic at the time, Czechoslovakia. But fun fact, Czech Republic just recently banned communism. You know why? Because communism is a serious threat to freedom and liberalism. So I'm glad that the Americans took the threat in Iran seriously, because the Soviets were actively destabilizing various countries, overthrowing them, imposing communism, and then getting them to, forcing them to join the Soviet communist bloc.
He had come under increasing Soviet pressure, so that at the end of his reign, the non-communist members of his government resigned and the communists took power. During his 3 years in office, Mossadegh had not managed to reach an agreement with the British on the nationalization of their oil refineries. The Americans, who up to then had only played a mediating role between Britain and Iran and were giving large amounts of loans to Mossadegh, were now facing a dilemma. On the one hand, the US did not want to finance Mossadegh's insane policies, but on the other hand, they had to finance Mossadegh's regime so that Iran would not further drive into the hands of the communists. To solve this issue, the United States decided to support the anti-Mossadegh coalition in Iran, who had formed because of Mossadegh's ever-increasing despotic rule and disastrous economic policies. The solution was finally Operation TP Ajax. The plan was to create a pro-Western government and at the same time to prevent the Tudor party, which was under the control of the Soviet Union, from coming to power. And thus the United States sent CIA agent Kermit Roosevelt to meet with resistance leader General Zahedi, a man who owned large estates and was considered a strict anti-communist. Zahedi was a man who had initially supported Mossadegh's National Front, but had fallen out with Mossadegh because, unlike Mossadegh, he was against a cooperation with the communists. After his breakup with Mossadegh, Zahedi became a member of the Committee of the Salvation of the Fatherland, Comité Nejat Vatan, also called Committee of 46, a resistance movement among Iranian officers and civilians who wanted to restore the constitutional monarchy and save Iran from a communist takeover. General Zahedi was a patriotic Iranian, very anti-British, who was in fact interned by the British after their troops occupied Iran during World War II. The objective of Operation TP Ajax was to prevent Iran from falling behind the Iron Curtain and to stop the Tudor party from taking power over Iran. TP Ajax was supposed to be a quasi-legal coup, that is, the Americans would bribe 20 parliament members so they would join the rest of the anti-Mossadegh opposition in parliament and dismiss him. Simultaneously, the Shah would appoint Zahedi as chief of staff. Then Parliament would give a vote of confidence to him so that the Shah appoints Zahedi as the new Prime Minister. And if Parliament refuses to cooperate, the Shah should order the Imperial Guard to remove Mossadegh by force, and then Zahedi would emerge victorious and accept the decree of Prime Minister. TP Ajax was supposed to be carried out on August 16th, 3 days before Mossadegh's actual removal by the Iranian people, but failed because Mossadegh, who had heard about the plan to dismiss him as Prime Minister, launched a full-on military coup d'etat.
Okay, so guys, again, so Operation Ajax actually failed. Operation Ajax failed because Mossadegh found out about it. So what actually happened is it was the Iranian people who overthrew Mossadegh. And again, as you can see, the reason that Operation Ajax even became a thing in the first place is because the Americans found out that Iranians were trying to overthrow Mossadegh. The Americans were worried about Iran falling behind the Iron Curtain the way that Czechoslovakia had at the time. And so the Americans were trying to prevent the spread of communism. Now, Operation Ajax actually failed because Mossadegh found out about it. And as soon as Mossadegh found out, he is the one who attempted a military coup d'etat. And then 3 days later, the Iranians were like, nope, Mossadegh, we're not going to let you take over. You are done. You are over. Bye. So let's go back. Pay attention to this part again, because this is really important. Like, the dates and the facts matter here, guys.
Move Mossadegh by force, and then Zahedi would emerge victorious and accept the decree of Prime Minister. TP Ajax was supposed to be carried out on August 16th, 3 days before Mossadegh's actual removal by the Iranian people, but failed. Because Mossadegh, who had heard about the plan to dismiss him as Prime Minister, launched a full-on military coup d'etat. TP Ajax, however, also failed to a large extent because the Shah refused to cooperate with the CIA. The Shah rejected all the plans, and no part of the plan could get operationalized.
Did you hear that? So the Shah actually refused to cooperate with the CIA. So again, this whole narrative about the CIA installing the Shah, it doesn't live up to scrutiny. It's literally this Islamist communist propaganda that is being pushed by people who are trying to smear and delegitimize the legitimate authority of the Shah of Iran, right? Like, they're saying themselves, the Shah did not cooperate with Operation Ajax.
The Shah argued that he would dismiss Mossadegh only if he did something illegal, and that he would never go against the constitution he had sworn to keep. Mossadegh, on the other hand, violated the constitution on August 13, 1953, by dissolving the parliament through a silly show he called a referendum. Mossadegh's so-called referendum to abolish the parliament was held between August 3rd and August 10th. Mossadegh, the great Democrat for free elections, ordered that those who were against him had to vote in specially marked polling booths. The result was that 99% had voted for the dissolution of the parliament, because the
Did you see that? Like, how is that a free and fair referendum when he basically says anyone who's voting against me has to vote in a special booth? Like, you're basically identifying who you are. So there was nothing fair or free about this so-called referendum that the so-called democratically elected prime minister had, right? But again, these are the facts and these are the details that non-Iranians either don't know about or they're hiding because they don't want you to know the truth about what actually happened.
The population was afraid of Mossadegh's terror squads who systematically murdered those who voted against Mossadegh. It must also be said that many voters were basically illiterate peasants who didn't know what they were even voting for and therefore had no vote of their own.
So again, people who voted against Mossadegh were murdered, right? So there's, your so-called democratically elected prime minister literally murdering people who voted against him. And remember, this is the guy who was against education. This is the guy who was against building railroads. This is the guy who was against modernizing Iran. Okay? So he basically wanted to keep the Iranian population destitute, uneducated, and illiterate, because that's the only way that he could see himself controlling the masses, is by keeping them uneducated and illiterate.
Thus, Mossadegh's referendum looked more like this.
General Aladdin won 98.8% of the vote.
Just to give you an idea how
I can't believe they made a reference to the movie The Dictator, but it's 100% true.
Ridiculous this referendum was. In some towns, where the population was around 3,000, there was a turnout of 600%. Had the dead also voted here? The Shah who condemned this rigged.
Does that sound familiar to you guys? Like all this voter fraud that's happening. The voter fraud is very common when it comes to the left and the communist parties, right? Again, let's go back, pay attention to this. So there were villages where there was 600% voter turnout. Like, how is that possible?
What they were even voting for and therefore had no vote of their own. Thus, Mossadegh's referendum looked more like this.
General Aladdin won 98.8% of the vote.
Just to give you an idea how ridiculous this referendum was. In some towns, where the population was around 3,000, there was a turnout of 600%. Had the dead also voted here? The Shah who condemned this rigged referendum wrote in his memoirs, Mossadegh's bulldozed elections had cost hundreds of people their lives. Mossadegh wanted to make himself the absolute dictator and had nothing else in his mind but to overthrow me and my dynasty. Accordingly, the Shah instructed Colonel Naseri, commander of the Imperial Guard, to bring Mossadegh the certificate of impeachment and General Zahedi the order to form a new government. With the dissolution of parliament, Mossadegh had given the Shah the right to remove him and replace him with another prime minister. According to the constitution, the Shah had the right.
So again, this is something you never hear in the narrative, right? It's not like the Shah was just, turning Iran into an authoritarian dictatorship. No, the Shah was saving Iran from an authoritarian dictator, and he was using the powers he had granted to him by the Constitution of Iran to depose of the prime minister and to bring in a new prime minister, right? Someone who wasn't hell-bent on turning Iran into a Soviet proxy.
To dismiss the prime minister after the dissolution of parliament and to replace him with an interim prime minister until new parliamentary elections were held. So much for the Shah being an unconstitutional dictator. Ergo, the Shah made it clear to the CIA that he would only remove Mossadegh legally, which he did. Therefore, the CIA did not play any significant role in the legal removal of the illegal government of the unelected dictator Mossadegh.
Did you catch that? So the CIA did not play a role in the legal removal of the let's just go back. Like he says this perfectly. The CIA did not play a role. Listen to this.
The Shah had the right to dismiss the prime minister after the dissolution of parliament and to replace him with an interim prime minister until new parliamentary elections were held. So much for the Shah being an unconstitutional dictator. Ergo, the Shah made it clear to the CIA that he would only remove Mossadegh legally, which he did. Therefore, the CIA did not play any significant role in the legal removal of the illegal government of the unelected dictator Mossadegh. Second,
there you go. So the Shah did not play a role in the illegal removal. The CIA did not play a role in the legal removal of the unelected prime minister and his illegal government, right? That's like
with another prime minister.
That is
according to the constitution.
Such an important and profound sentence there. And again, no one really pays attention to that. No one really focuses on that fact.
The Shah had the right to dismiss the prime minister after the dissolution of parliament and to replace him with an interim prime minister until new parliamentary elections were held. So much for the Shah being an unconstitutional dictator. Ergo, the Shah made it clear to the CIA that he would only remove Mossadegh legally, which he did. Therefore, the CIA did not play any significant role in the legal removal of the illegal government of the unelected dictator Mossadegh. In the Wilbur report, we also see that even though the United States and Britain repeatedly threaten the Shah that if he does not cooperate with them, they will end his reign, the Shah categorically rejects all offers and says that if Mossadegh holds a referendum to resolve the parliament, I will dismiss Mossadegh legally. In a meeting with US ambassador in May 1953, the Shah states emphatically that first, if Zahedi is to become prime minister, it must be through legal means, no coup. Secondly, if the new government does not receive financial and economic assistance caused by Mossadegh's disastrous policies, I would prefer Mossadegh to remain prime minister. What we see in these documents about the events that led to August 19 is the sincerity from the Shah, who, despite all the threats of the great powers in his youth, with dignity and courage, even at the cost of threatening his kingship and his life, does not undertake illegal action and respects the law and acts only where the Constitution authorizes him. After TP Ajax failed, the US government decided to improve relations with Mossadegh, and the CIA orders Roosevelt to take no further actions. At this point, the Americans thought that Mossadegh was going to remain in power for about 2 months until the communists would oust him. And therefore, not only did the CIA cease activities against Mossadegh, but they even decided to support him following their failed plan to remove him.
So I don't know who made this documentary, but so far for me, it is I would say it's a 10 out of 10. The only reason that I'm giving it a 9 out of 10 is because he speaks a little bit too quickly. And so for non-Iranians, it's kind of hard to follow. But everything he has said so far is 100% accurate. I wish that someone would take this documentary and turn it into like a full-fledged high-level production, because this documentary could very easily counter the Islamist and jihadi narratives that have been put out there about, Mossadegh being democratically elected, all that nonsense, right? Like, this documentary is 100% accurate, 100% facts, but because it's just like an independent, I mean, it looks like it was, someone just did it independently because they want to share the truth. And the guy's obviously an Iranian, because when he says certain words or phrases or names in Persian, he speaks with no Iranian accent, right? Like lahja nadare. So it's pretty obvious that this is an Iranian who made this documentary to try and share the truth about the 1953 so-called coup d'etat. The reason it doesn't have more views or more attention is because, it is very, very low budget. But again, everything he's saying is 100% true. And it's very obvious that he put a lot of time and effort into this. And I think it's a shame that it's a shame that it doesn't have more attention, because it's just not, as glamorous as some of those, high level documentary budget productions, which are visually interesting, but are factually inaccurate. And again, like so far, all the documentaries that we have seen together about the 1979 Islamic Revolution have been terrible. The highest score so far has been a 3 out of 10, right? But this one for me, this is like it would be 10 out of 10, but because it's very, very jam-packed, 9 out of 10. But I mean, for me, it's a 10 out of 10 at heart in terms of information provided.
With the appointment of General Zahedi as the new prime minister on August 13th, Mossadegh was officially deposed and had to resign. However, he refused and launched a military coup on August 16, marking the beginning of his 3-day dictatorship. A year prior, on October 23, 1952, Mossadegh had dissolved the Senate. That was an important step because the Senate was responsible for reviewing and approving laws. And on August 3rd,
Guys, that's important. So no one ever talks about the fact that Mossadegh literally dissolved the Iranian Senate, right? What sort of democratically elected prime minister who wants to democratize Iran will dissolve the other institutions, the other democratic institutions within the country? The guy was literally trying to turn Iran into a dictatorship under Soviet control.
1953, Mossadegh was given the authority to take over the judicial and executive branches, just as today these three branches in Iran are under the direct supervision of the supreme leader of the Islamic Republic. Mossadegh abolished the separation and independence of the three powers, enabling the National Front to eliminate any other alternative in Iran to its rule, except of course the Communist Tudeh Party. Mossadegh wanted to turn Iran into a Soviet-style republic. His goal was to replace the parliamentary monarchy in Iran with a republic and assume its presidency. In Egypt, for example, a republic had already been proclaimed on June 18, 1953, after King Farouk had been deposed through a coup d'etat by his own prime minister. Fearing a similar fate for Iran, most members of parliament turned against Mossadegh, including his closest allies. On August 13, 1953, Mossadegh, in collaboration with General Taghi Riyahi, drew up a detailed plan to overthrow the monarchy. Instead of accepting his dismissal order, Mossadegh should first declare that the army had revolted against him. Second, Mossadegh should order the arrest of senior officers of the army. Third, the Imperial Guard should be eliminated and the Shah should be put under house arrest. And then large demonstrations should be organized in Tehran, and the speakers of the National Front, the Pan-Iranists, and the Tudeh Party should inform the people about the abolition of the monarchy and the establishment of a republic in Iran. At 1 o'clock in the morning on August 16, 1953, the Shah's decree, which had removed Mossadegh from the post of Prime Minister, was delivered to his house by Colonel Naseri, and Mossadegh was notified. But Mossadegh sent Naseri to the army headquarters where he was to be arrested. Mossadegh, now a dismissed prime minister, accused the army of making a coup and thereupon ordered General Riyahi to arrest the accompanying officers of Colonel Naseri. The Shah was called a dictator and General Riyahi was ordered to disband the Imperial Guard, arresting their officers and sending them to West Tehran to be dispersed among the brigades and divisions. Mossadegh also ordered the arrest and imprisonment of many high-ranking government and military officials without a warrant. And so the decree of Mossadegh's dismissal became the basis of the leftist propaganda from that moment until today. Now imagine Mossadegh, whose request of emergency powers were not accepted by the parliament, but was appointed prime minister nonetheless by the Shah, is being portrayed as the only democratically elected prime minister Iran ever had, while the Shah, who always adhered to the constitution, is constantly called a brutal dictator by the leftist media. How crazy is that?
I mean, it's always the lefties, right? Again, just like look at this image, right? So you have Mossadegh, right? So the so-called good guy Mossadegh, he bankrupted the state, he arrested political opponents, he failed to make a good oil deal, he dissolved the Senate, the parliament, and the courts, and he allowed communist thugs to murder civilians. This is a so-called good guy versus the bad guy, the Shah of Iran, the bad guy who gave charity to the poor. He achieved a 75% profit oil deal with the Italians. He pardoned political opponents like Mossadegh and others. He always adhered to the constitution, and he left Iran to avoid a civil war, right? Temporarily. So the good guy versus the bad guy. So you can see this revisionist history in action where the Islamists and the communists are literally trying to portray the bad guy, Mossadegh, as the good guy, and the good guy, the Shah, as the bad guy. Because again, it's the Islamists and the communists who are pushing this propaganda.
Yes, Mossadegh, who established an absolute dictatorship in Iran, is advertised by the leftist media to the entire world as a model for the struggle for democracy. A man who built Iran's first secret police, as well as many prisons, to detain his political opponents, has been branded by the leftist media as a fighter for political freedom. On August 16th, several army officers were arrested and a bounty of 100,000 rials was set on the head of the Shah's appointed Prime Minister, General Zahedi, which was a lot of money back then in Iran. Adjusting inflation, with this sum you could have bought a 71 Mercedes in 1972. Mossadegh's first decision as dictator of Iran was to take command of the army, something that only the Shah was authorized to do under the constitution. Again, very democratic. At 6 a.m. on August 16, Mossadegh called the first cabinet of the so-called Mossadegh government to a meeting at his home to decide what this government would be like. A radio statement was broadcasted at 7 a.m. which stated that Mossadegh had assumed all the duties that were designated for the Shah in the constitution and declared.
So, based on what authority did Mossadegh think he could do a radio broadcast and just unilaterally declare that all of the Shah's powers now belong to him? Like, he had no authority to do that, no basis, no nothing. Do you see how this guy was not actually a Democrat or anything relating to democracy? Like, this guy was literally a Russian plant who was trying to turn Iran into an authoritarian dictatorship. Imagine just waking up one day and then someone's just unilaterally taking control over the country. It's wild. It's insane. But you never hear this narrative in Western English language documentaries about Mossadegh.
That the constitution was invalid and ordered the removal of the name Shah throughout Iran. To legitimize his illegal government at 7 o'clock in the morning, Mossadegh ordered Bashir Farahmand, the head of the General Directorate of Propaganda, to read the government announcement twice that a coup had taken place by the army at 1 o'clock in the morning and on August 16th, but that the coup was foiled at 4 o'clock in the morning. Then Mossadegh ordered the seizure of the imperial palaces and then to arrest the Shah. What Mossadegh, however, did not suspect was that the Shah, who was outside Tehran, had left the country. The Shah, seeing Mossadegh refusing to step down and seeing him systematically arresting political opponents, immediately realized Mossadegh was doing a coup d'etat and decided to leave Iran in the early morning of August 16. In a statement, he declared that since he has sworn an oath to be the guardian of the constitution and of the law, and since he has noticed Mossadegh violating the constitution and that he wants to seize total power for himself, he decided to dismiss him. And seeing Mossadegh disobeying his orders, he decided to leave Iran temporarily to avoid a civil war and unnecessary bloodshed. I ask you, are these really the actions of a power-hungry dictator? Would a tyrant voluntarily leave the country to give the people the choice to freely decide who they want to follow? To arrest the Shah, Foreign Minister Hossein Fatemi sent a telegram to the Iranian ambassador in Baghdad. Embassy contact with those who fled the morning after the failed military coup without informing the government is not permitted in any way. At the Mossadegh government's cabinet meeting, it was decided that on the evening of August 16th, demonstrations by the Tudeh Party, the National Front, the Iran Party, the Third Force, and the Pan-Iranists would take place in Bahorestan Square. They would announce the establishment of the so-called new government of Mossadegh and with it the abolition of the parliamentary monarchy. And so, an hour after noon, the Tudeh Party, the National Front, and the Pan-Iranists marched through the streets of Tehran towards Bahorestan Square with red flags and hammers, chanting communist slogans to declare the establishment of a socialist republic under Mossadegh. The people of the capital trembled with fear and saw with their own eyes that the Soviet Union was literally seizing power in Iran. In the meantime, the Shah arrived in Baghdad airport and was well received by the Iraqi authorities, acknowledging him as Iran's head of state, despite Hossein Fatemi's propaganda. The Shah's departure, however, encouraged the communists to the party to stage demonstrations in Tehran, chanting the slogan, "The Democratic Republic shall rise." During these pro-Mossadegh demonstrations, communist gangs along...
It's crazy to me how communists will use language to obfuscate their true intent, right? Like the communists are talking about a democratic republic. Meanwhile, what they actually mean is like a communist country that's controlled by the Soviets, right? Like there's nothing democratic about communism, but yet that's the language and the narrative that they use. Very similar to how in 1979 they called for an Islamic republic, and yet there's nothing free or democratic about what Iran is currently like. Occupied Iran right now is occupied by a brutal Islamic dictatorship, right? But just pay attention to the language that they use, because they have been trying to fool people with this rhetoric, and unfortunately they have fooled a lot of people with this rhetoric for a very, very long time.
With thugs and rioters dispersed in the streets of Tehran and attacked people with stones and sticks while looting shops and stores. And so the people's fear and concerns about the Soviet-backed Tudeh militants dominating the affairs of the country was growing. In Baghdad, the Shah told the Speaker of the Iraqi parliament that he hopes to return to Iran soon and that he has appointed General Zahedi as prime minister because Mossadegh was abusing his authority, and that General Zahedi did not stage a coup, but that he merely informed Mossadegh of my order for his dismissal. The socialist forces of Mossadegh now had gathered at Baharestan Square, and as tapes of the demonstrations show, Fatemi declared the abolition of the monarchy and announced the establishment of the People's Democratic Republic. "We do not want a king," all the speakers said with the utmost ruthlessness and impudence, followed by a handful of traitors and ignorant people shouting, "Complete the task of the country." The demonstrations began with a speech by Jalali Musavi, a former member of the parliament. Then Hossein Fatemi came behind the microphone and gave a speech. As the tapes show, which were later broadcasted in the trial of Mossadegh and General Riahi, Fatemi called the end of Iran's constitution and its parliamentary monarchy and declared the establishment of the Democratic Republic of Iran. And at the same time, Mossadegh's followers tore down the statue of Reza Shah in Baharestan Square with a crane and then dragged down the remaining statues of the Pahlavi kings in Tehran.
Do you see? So what they tried to do in the 1950s, unfortunately, they eventually ended up becoming successful in 1979. So the 1979 Islamic Revolution, guys, it didn't happen overnight. It was a process that took about 40 years. Now, this particular documentary focuses mostly on the communist infiltration, which I do appreciate, but there is, of course, an element of Islamist infiltration as well. So these communists were not acting alone. They were also being bolstered and supported by Khomeini at the time, Khabar Margesh, Khak to Saresh, and also, of course, all of the Islamists. So this is focusing mainly on the communists, but I do appreciate that because the other documentaries don't really go as much in depth into the Russian and Soviet influence and propaganda in Iran, but this does, and I do appreciate that. And for people in the chat, yes, the Islamic Revolution of 1979 took almost 40 years. The first attempt was in 1941. It was not successful, and so they kept on trying again and again. You can actually find where I talk about that in a similar documentary that we critique. It's the one in this very playlist. So this is part of a playlist called, Iranians rating documentaries about Iran. Go and find the documentary which is about the 1979 Islamic Revolution, and I give it a rating of 3 out of 10. That's the one where they go in depth into how the Islamic coup d'etat of 1979 took almost 40 years. So one of the reasons that we Iranians are speaking out a lot about what we're seeing in the West is because, again, Iran didn't become a country governed by Sharia law overnight. It took 40 years, and it was just this slow creep of Islam and communism that eventually took over and got to the point where it became so influential that by the time the rest of Iranians woke up, it was too late, and Islam took over and Sharia law took over.
Mossadegh personally ordered his followers to tear down these statues. This was Mossadegh's message to the Iranian nation that there was no place for a Shah in his so-called Mossadegh government. You must realize that most things that happened on the orders of Mossadegh in this 3-day period from August 16 to August 19 were not spontaneous decisions, but they were rather based on a detailed plan, as Mossadegh and his accomplices confessed later in court. Abdul Qasim Amini, the guardsman of the royal court, was Mossadegh's cousin and simultaneously his spy, and he had informed Mossadegh in advance of the Shah's decision to dismiss him, therefore not making Mossadegh's violent seizure of power a mere reaction towards some attempted coup by the imperial guard, but a carefully planned betrayal. To US Ambassador Henderson, Mossadegh even told that while he doubted the authenticity of the royal decree dismissing him, it would not have mattered to him anyway, since he did not care about the Shah's opinion, which implies that Mossadegh was going to make a coup regardless of his legal dismissal. Mossadegh, however, had misjudged the situation. The people were not at all enthusiastic about the parade. They did not cheer the Marxist socialist takeover, but were horrified when they saw Mossadegh's communist supporters tearing.
Right? So the vast majority of Iranians at the time, were horrified that these communists were trying to take control of Iran. And so in the 1950s and 1953, they spoke out. Pay attention to this part, guys.
Bring down the statues of their king and defacing the statues of the father of the Iranian nation, Reza Shah. They knew full well what Mossadegh was intending to achieve. And so, on August 19, 1953, at 6 a.m., people took to the streets, and the uprising of the Iranians against Mossadegh's government began. It is ironic that the very idea to establish a republic in Iran was first considered by then Prime Minister and later King Reza Pahlavi. But the parliament and the Iranian people opposed this idea, arguing that Iran needs a Shah and that this is the culture and tradition of Iran. And this attitude did not change with Mossadegh. The Iranians, loving their king, opposed Mossadegh, and when Mossadegh called the army to restore order, the army instead ousted him. Mossadegh's supporters often claim that thousands of Iranians were bribed by foreigners to demonstrate against Mossadegh. But when we look at eyewitness accounts, we quickly find out the opposite. Sha'ban Ja'fari, often known as Sha'ban the Brainless, was an infamous street thug in Tehran. During the national uprising against Mossadegh, he was often regarded as a leader of street fights for the Shah. In an interview, he stated that he did not receive any bribes, but that he had revolted against Mossadegh because he loved the Shah, as we can see in this interview.
سوالی که من میکنم اینه که شما با اعتقاد و باور دنبال یه چیزی میرفتید یا منافع شخصی داشتید. لولیشو بهتون بگم، مثلا پول بهتون میدادن که این کارا رو بکنید. ما همیشه خانم لخ بودیم و شهروان پامون نداشتیم از هیچ کس سر نه خب ما میدونستیم که امروز مصدق میخواد شاه من.
So these are the interviews, guys, that you don't see. So this guy is literally saying in Persian, he's saying Mossadegh wanted to drive the Shah out of the country. We weren't paid to support the Shah. We supported the Shah because we loved the Shah. Pay attention to this. See, do you see that? So he's saying we loved the Shah. We loved the Shah. No one paid us. We didn't want communism. We wanted the Shah. That's why we came out to the streets. Oh my. What countries do you see are becoming Islamic now? Gee, I don't know. I mean, look at the UK. Look at Canada. Look at the United States. I mean, all these countries have a serious, like, Islamic jihadi problem where you have all these Islamic radicals coming into these countries and are slowly infiltrating the government. So yeah, there's like a huge Islamist problem in Western countries, and it's being bolstered and supported by communists, right? Because that's exactly what happened in Iran. The communists supported the Islamists, and eventually they overthrew the Shah of Iran because they were all, so-called anti-imperialist, whatever BS nonsense. And then as soon as that happened, the Islamists took over, and then they executed all of the woke, progressive, lefty, communist, socialist, whatever. But I see a lot of countries becoming Islamic in the next 20 to 30 years. Canada, UK, America. I mean, it's all there. And actually, if you subscribe to my channel, I do my usual live streams at 12 noon. And today, during my, Goldie Show podcast, I spoke about how Canada is becoming incredibly radicalized. And tomorrow, I'm actually going to speak about how the United States is becoming incredibly radicalized. So you want to make sure to tune into my live streams at 12 noon Eastern. I go live Monday to Friday at 12 noon. And I speak about all of this as well.
And so, from 6 o'clock in the morning of August 19th, groups of people took to the streets, and the uprising of the people in the capital against the Mossadegh government began. All strata of the population participated in the uprising. Workers, artisans, peasants, students, but also soldiers and policemen, the imperial guard and women. In a fever of patriotism, people occupied the radio station and then took strategically important centers and government offices. One government institution after another was taken over by the people. And when the radio office was occupied by the people, the victory of the people was announced by playing the royal anthem and the voices of Mir Ashrafi and Peyraste. The people's representatives in the parliament were heard on the radio. The message was clear. The representatives of the Iranian people were behind the Shah and the legal Prime Minister Zahedi. Mossadegh's Interior Minister, Dr. Sadeghi, went to Mossadegh's house on Wednesday morning, August 19th, at about 7 a.m. Mossadegh told Sadeghi that since the Shah had left the country, a royal council should be formed through a plebiscite. Sadeghi relayed this to the ministers, who informed him that people in Sepah Square were shouting slogans such as "Long live the Shah," "Death to the Tudor party," and "Save the monarchy," demanding the Shah to return. General Riahi told Sadeghi by telephone that Mossadegh had expressed a desire to hand over the post of police chief and military governor to his nephew and son-in-law, General Mohammad Daftari, for fear that the police forces would join the people. Sadeghi.
Wow, so did you catch that? So Mossadegh literally wanted to give control of the police force to his nephew to prevent the police from joining the people. So again, as you can tell, it was Mossadegh who was the dictator, not the Shah. But again, this is the real narrative and the real history that you're not going to find in mainstream media and mainstream documentaries about Iran and Mossadegh.
Was again informed that hundreds of people were demonstrating against Mossadegh and his government in several places in the city with the participation of officers and soldiers. The entire nation had revolted against Mossadegh, and they were shouting, "Long live the Shah." When asked by the Minister of Interior why they did not stop the demonstrators, Sadeghi replied that the authorities could no longer trust their own soldiers. The mayor of Tehran, Dr. Sayyed Mohsen Nasr, told the Minister of Interior that the people had attacked the city administration and that the soldiers were doing nothing. Some people also attacked the prisons built on Mossadegh's orders. Several were killed, but the innocent people who had been imprisoned by Mossadegh were freed. Ironically, the house of the popularly loved Mossadegh, which was also the seat of his government, was a military fortress constantly guarded by tanks. During the uprising, his house was continuously attacked by the people. Even though Mossadegh's guards shot at demonstrators without hesitation, killing several civilians. Not so much loved by the people, I guess. When Sadeghi arrived at Mossadegh's house around 3 p.m., he found other members of the Mossadegh government. Foreign Minister Fatemi was also there, who said that the most important thing was to maintain the radio station. However, Sadeghi countered that this was not easy because the army and police had joined the people. Mossadegh was very upset when he heard that the people had taken control of the radio station and that the imperial anthem was played on radio. So the people do not appreciate your attempt to turn Iran into a proletariat dictatorship? Oh gee, what a shame. Then General Riahi informed everyone in Mossadegh's house that the people have taken the main places of the city and occupied the radio center. It is good that you give the order to put down the resistance. Colonel Izzatullah Mumtaz, the commander of the mountain brigades in charge of guarding and defending Mossadegh's house, entered and told Mossadegh that the opposition was growing stronger and that they would win. At 6:40 p.m., Colonel Mumtaz came in again and said the 2 Sherman tanks, which are stronger than our tanks in front of the police station on Pahlavi Street,
Yeah, Gandalf, I like this song too. It's like Namajavide Vatan, Sobe Omide Vatan. I can't really sing it, but it is a good song.
Have been seized by the opposition. Continuous gunfire had now been heard for an hour between the Mossadegh troops and the opposition forces. After a few minutes, Brigadier General Fulatvan came in and said, "In the present situation, continuing the shelling of the opposition forces is futile and causes many civilian casualties and is therefore dangerous to your lives, gentlemen. Give the order to surrender." Mossadegh replies, "No. I will stay here no matter what." Fulatvan then said, "What have I done? I wish I had not accepted this role," and again demanded Mossadegh to surrender.
So for the non-Iranians, the song right now that's being played in the background is like an incredibly like patriotic song that like resonates with all Iranians, right? It's just like one of those, I don't know how to describe it. It's just very, very patriotic.
Eventually, even Mossadegh's closest allies turned their backs on him, and Razavi, Shaigan, and Zirkzadeh issued a statement saying, "Dr. Mossadegh considers himself the rightful prime minister even though the forces of law and order disobey him and refuse to continue defending his house." But the shooting continued anyway, and Mossadegh's guards killed 41 people and wounded 75 others. Who is the bloodthirsty dictator now? The Shah who leaves the country to avoid a civil war, or Mossadegh who shoots at his own people to secure his power?
Again, so all of the the accusations that the Islamists and the jihadis have made about the Shah, they're all false, but every single accusation is an admission of guilt. So literally it was Mossadegh who ordered his supporters to shoot at Iranians who did not want Iran to become a Russian proxy, right? So Mossadegh was the authoritarian dictator. Mossadegh was the brutal, savage communist who was literally willing to murder Iranians in order to hand over Iran to the Soviets at the time, right?
After the uprising of the people of Tehran, other residents joined the uprising, and so the residents of the cities of Rasht, Esfahan, Kermanshah, Shiraz, Ahvaz also declared their loyalty to the monarchy and their willingness to martyrdom. After 12 hours of bloody clashes between the people in Tehran and the Mossadegh government, all ministries and government offices, military centers and barracks finally fell into the hands of the people, and Mossadegh's home was finally stormed. Mossadegh, who had not accepted the people's resistance, jumped from the wall of his house into...
It's really interesting how Mossadegh, claimed he was for the people, and yet when the people of Iran said, "We don't want you and we don't want communism," Mossadegh tried to shoot them, right? So much for a democratically elected prime minister, right? Like the guy was literally a Russian puppet who wanted to become a dictator.
To a neighbor's house and fled, but was arrested and imprisoned after spending several days in hiding. Very fit for a person who seems to be sick and keeps fainting in front of the camera, isn't it?
Ew, this is his voice.
ما شروع کردیم به هیاهو کردن. اونم رفت پشت تریبون و گوشا خودشو کر گرفت به داد و قال و حملات ما و
why does he sound exactly like an آخوند? Like صداش دقیقاً صدای آخونده. Like مثل ملاها داره حرف میزنه. Like اصلا صداش به من چندش میده. Sorry, I had to say that in Farsi. Like he sounds like exactly how like the Ayatollahs speak today. Like his voice just makes me like he sounds like an Ayatollah. But they're all the same, right?
خوندن برنامهش ما دیدیم فریادا و جایی نمیرسه. من پیشنهاد کردم که این تخت جلو رو بکوبیم. این تخته هست که کارآمیز میکنه. بنا کردیم کوبیدن این تخته و باز اون بنا کرد خوندن. ادامه داد که چیز بشه. اول دفعه هم که ما متوجه یه موضوعی شدیم اونجا بود. مکی پلو من نشسته بود، آقای دکتر مصدق اونور. مکی گفت آقا غش کنید، دیگه کاری نمیشه کرد. یک دفعه دکتر مصدق غش کرد.
So they're literally saying that Mossadegh pretended to faint in parliament in order to avoid an argument and avoid answering for what he was doing in terms of trying to turn Iran into a dictatorship controlled by the Soviets. Like, that's wild.
هیچی حالت غش و رعشه و اینا و بعد کریم پور خودش از تو تماشاچی انداخت پایین که پدر ملت کشتن و اینا که مجلس تنفس بشه.
Yes, the national resistance against Mossadegh was a popular uprising and the CIA was not aware that something like that was taking place. However,
یا گندالف اون صدای مصدق بود. اون صدای مصدق بود دقیقا انگار مثلا نمیدونم یه آخوند بود داشت صحبت میکرد. like صداش و لهجه‌ش و طوری که حرف میزد و همین آخوندهای عوضی جمهوری اهریمنی اسلامی امروز هیچ فرقی نداره.
CIA agent Kermit Roosevelt also played a role in this popular uprising but was in fact disobeying orders as he was instructed to leave Iran after the failed coup attempt on August 16th and thus was acting on his own initiative. Having said that, Roosevelt merely played a minor role giving some help to organize the army. Roosevelt had absolutely no support from the US government and was disregarding the chain of command. He would have been probably executed by the US government for treason if the attempt had failed. To popular cheers, the Shah returned from his Iraqi exile and ordered the convening of a court to try Mossadegh for treason. The prosecutor requested the execution of Mossadegh for treason and undermining the constitution. Mossadegh was charged by the military prosecution to overthrow the imperial constitutional government with the following charges. Although Mossadegh was found...
So keep in mind, Mossadegh wasn't charged with overthrowing the Shah. He was charged with overthrowing the constitution and the parliament, right? Again, the democratically elected parliament. Mossadegh wanted to turn Iran from a constitutional monarchy into an authoritarian dictatorship controlled by the Soviets. So that's what he was charged with. Again, the communists and the Islamists and the armchair experts on Iran don't actually look into the facts, and so they just promote that jihadi communist propaganda.
Found guilty in all 13 cases. He was sentenced to only 3 years of house arrest, and this was because the Shah had told the court that Mossadegh should not be charged for his offenses against him personally. Evil Shah my ass. This is now the second time that the Shah has saved the life of Mossadegh, who had been accused of treason yet again.
So again, everyone who claims the Shah was this brutal authoritarian dictator literally has no idea what they're talking about, or they are purposely lying because they're just anti-constitutional monarchy. So this was the second time that Mossadegh had tried to assassinate the Shah. The first time, again, was in 1941, like the documentary said at the beginning. The first time the Shah forgave him, and now again, the Shah once again forgave Mossadegh, right? So who's the dictator here? Who's the authoritarian here? it's not the Shah, it's Mossadegh. So the 1953, coup is the most misunderstood era of Iranian political history, and unfortunately, it's one of the most factually incorrect narratives that is being pushed by the communists and the Islamists just because they want to attack the Shah of Iran for no other reason.
To sum it up, on the one hand, we had the supporters of Mossadegh who wanted to overthrow the monarchy and establish a socialist republic. And on the other hand, we had the Iranian people standing behind the Shah's constitutionally appointed Prime Minister Zahedi, who wanted to preserve their parliamentary monarchy. And therefore, the people overthrew Mossadegh's government. As simple as that. No massive CIA involvement, no coup. So anyone, including almost all scientists in this field, who claim that the removal of Mossadegh was the result of Operation TP Ajax, must know that their claim is unequivocally unsubstantiated. I hereby take my leave. This was the Persian history. I hope you enjoyed it. If yes, share this video and leave a like. Thanks for watching. Until next time. And finally, I want to end this video with a speech of thanks from the Shah addressed to the Iranian people.
تحریکات ادامه داشت تا اینکه پادشاه شما برای اینکه پرده ها به عقب برود و قیافه حقیقی هر کس روشن بشود بهتر دانست که در غیاب خود او ملت ایران قضاوت خودش را بکند و شما مردم در 28 مرداد قضاوت خود را به اون طریق نشان دادید. و میخواهم بگویم که نه فقط خواستار مراجعت پادشاه قانونی موروثی خود بودید، بلکه یک رسالت تاریخی اضافه بر آن به من دادید که منجر به انقلاب 6 بهمن شد.
Wow. So first of all, Jane, thank you so much for the support. Appreciate that. Guys, this documentary was fantastic. I thoroughly enjoyed it. It's, it's obvious that this is a low production, low budget documentary, but the person who made this documentary, they did it out of their love and, desire for people to know the truth about Iranian history. From their accent when they were pronouncing Iranian words, I can tell that this person is Iranian 100%. So despite the low production quality, I would give this documentary a 10 out of 10. It accurately reflects the truth about Mossadegh versus the Shah. It accurately calls out the fake news and propaganda that's being promoted by the Islamists and the jihadis when it comes to the truth. So I would give this documentary a recommendation of 10 out of 10. For the Iranians in the chat, I would love to know what you think, but I think this documentary goes a long way to counter the propaganda and disinformation about what happened in 1953. So yeah, I'm seeing a lot of 10 out of 10s. Amir, 10 out of 10. Major is saying 10 out of 10. Yeah, like I think this one's a 10 out of 10. Like it's Omid says, solid 10. I think this is very high level detail by the narrator. You don't think he sounded Persian? I don't know, Omid, I think he sounded Persian, but I don't know. I guess we'll have to agree to disagree on that. But at least, on the rating, we're giving it a 10 out of 10. Yeah, like it's incredibly factual. Again, it's not glamorous, but it's all out there. And I actually, guys, I see some people from X are saying 10 out of 10 as well. Gandalf, 10 out of 10. All right, J, 10 out of 10. All right, so both Iranians and non-Iranians are giving this a 10 out of 10. Yeah, guys, I think we found our 10 out of 10. It's not necessarily about the Islamic Revolution, but it is an important precursor to that because it does counter a lot of the disinformation. So I want to thank you all for joining me for this watch party tonight. I hope you enjoyed this stream. I will include the link to this documentary on its own in the description of this video. So I actually did upload this documentary to my YouTube channel. So you are able to go and find it there. It's, you just go to my videos and it's there, but I will include the link as well in the description of this particular live stream. So thank you everyone for joining me tonight. Thank you for all of your support. We didn't make the goal tonight, so I'm not going to stick around to do a Q&A, but maybe tomorrow we'll hit our goal. But guys, if you enjoyed this live stream, make sure that you like and subscribe to my channel. Help me get the word out there. And I will see you all tomorrow at 12 noon Eastern for our regular podcast. And tomorrow the topic is going to be Islamic radicalization in the United States. So see you all tomorrow. And as always, Payand Iran and Javid Shah.